Hi guys and welcome. So in this video we're going to be doing a bit of a tutorial on how to spray candy paint. Now this is the way that I do it, and this is the way that I've learned to do it, and the way that I found the easiest. In this first video we're going to be going through the base coat to put the candy on top of, and then we're going to start off the candy, and in the second video we're going to finish the candy off and do the lacquer over the top. So I'm going to try and include as much detail as I can for you as we go through the process, so you can see what I've done and why I've done it. The prep stage for a minute we're just going to skip out, and then when we get a bit further into the video, when we've got a bit more time to talk, then just to fill in a bit of the gaps, I'll talk you through the prep side of things then. So spray gun wise, I'm using my Iwata W400 Bell Area. It's a 1.3. It's really nice for putting base coat down, and I'm using this just because I have the Aurora Lumaiii on this one, and I wanted to use that for this video just so you can see the sort of difference that this light can make when you're doing some jobs. Now as you can see, it's switched on now and it's really bright. Now hopefully this will come through alright when you're watching it on your computer or on your TV, but this really does give a brilliant look for you when you're putting the paint down at your coverage. Now our booth's not the best lit in the world, but it's also not the worst. And I found the other day when I was doing a car and I was using, it was a pearl purple, that in the normal booth light it looked covered, and then as soon as I got the light on the spray gun just to check it, it was far from covered. So a job like this, where we're using a coarse metallic base, which is basically just a pure tinter. So unfortunately, although it's a pure tinter, it's not got a lot of body of silver colour to it. It's pretty much just pure coarse metallic, which is ideal for putting candy over because it'll give us a really nice look to the finished job. But at the same time, coverage wise, it'll take quite a few more coats than say your average moondust silver or something, which also has colours added in with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the light to basically aid us on this stage with getting a nice even perfect base down for the candy to go on top of. Now the panel wise, what I've done is I've used wet on wet primer on these. This bike's a show bike. It came in and it's in immaculate condition, so what I don't want to do is start having to really harsh sand these and really go to town on them, breaking through loads of layers of paint, etc. So what I did, we used a P500. I DA'd them all down nice and smooth to make sure they were really nice. And then with this being a candy job, and I don't want any risk of any areas that aren't all the same colour, or any risk of frying up, or any reactions or anything like that, I've basically used a wet on wet primer. Now it was a 4:1 Capsi primer, which the manufacturer says can't be used wet on wet, but my paint rep has told me before that you can use it wet on wet. So what I did was do that at a mix of 4:1:1, and then I actually put it through my Bell Area and put it down 2 really thin coats, and then it's left a perfect finish over the P500s. To basically, we're not going to have to do any sanding or anything like that, because a colour such as this, the tiniest little sanding scratch is going to show with this coarse metallic. And if you've done candy before, or you know much about candy, the tiniest imperfection in your base coat will show straight through in your candy paintwork. So rather than risking doing my normal process of putting maybe 3 or 4 thick coats down, and then rubbing all those down, and then having to wet and dry it really fine, and risking missing something along the way, I have found before that when I've done candy, that doing it wet on wet's the best way, because there are 0 sanding scratches now in these whatsoever. I'm going straight on top of my wet on wet primer. I did the wet on wet the night before, and then came in first thing early the next morning, tack ragged everything off, make sure there's no dust on anything, and then you're straight ready then for the base coat to go on top of. As far as doing a primer wet on wet, always check with your manufacturers or your data sheets or anything like that that the solvent base coat will adhere the next day or a few hours later, you know, without having to sand the primer. So you can just see there, I'll just show you a little shot with and without the light, just so you can see the difference. On something like the underside of a panel here, it makes a lot of difference just to being able to see those hard to reach areas. You know, no matter how good you be with it, sometimes you got underside of arches, undersides of sills on cars. Maybe it's you're painting an old classic Mini or something like that, and you've got to get inside it to paint all the interior and everything, and you can't see what you're doing properly. One of these would be brilliant help. And plus, the colour band of the light is in the same range as a 3M sun gun. So this is what you're going to see outside when the car's in the sun. So if you're doing a job and you want to check your blends as you're going along, check your coverage, check how even your metallics laid down, it's brilliant for stuff like that. So that's coat number 1 down, and a bit about that first coat and a bit about what we've done prep wise. So we're going to go into coat number 2 now. We've let that flash off. And one thing that I will say is in between any of your coats at this stage, when you're putting down this first strong silver base coat layer down, is that if you see any dust or anything like that, tack rag it as you go along, because this is the foundation for your candy paint job at the end, looking, you know, like worth its money if you want. Any imperfections at this stage are going to show up tenfold when the candy's out on this job and it's outside in the sun. Personally, each time I've put a coat down with this colour or any colour when I'm doing a candy job, is I will then go and tack rag this base coat off once it's flashed off, and then I'll start applying my next coat. That way I know that nothing's settled on it in between. There's going to leave no dust on top of that silver that could then, when we start putting the candy on top, leave marks in our candy look. So I find it just better to be safe than sorry with candy. I have done candies before, and I have to say I have messed one up before, which is why I do this way now. I've done one before where I didn't quite get enough coverage, which is why I'm using the Lumaiii for this. It's absolutely ideal for the custom painting side of things, and I've used it on the accident repairs that I've been doing as well. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos with it in the future as we start off adding to this playlist with a little bit of a series on custom paint work and some few bits and bobs that I've been asked to do for you guys. I've taken a bit of a break from working so hard because I feel like I've let the channel down a little bit by not being able to spend quite as much time on it since I've been working 2 jobs. So I've actually changed my shift patterns around now so that I can get back to uploading at least 2 to 3 videos a week for you guys, and I want to start adding stuff in like this for you. Right, so as you can see there now, looks like I've got a problem with the light, but this is because the day before I was actually respraying a van, and one battery lasted through the whole of the van that I did, all the base coat and all the clear coat. So just going to give this battery a quick change, and this is how easy it is. Literally, you can just pop the cover straight off the back of the light, and then this is the little kit that you get. It's quite a nice box. It's all nicely foam padded out. You've got a little instruction booklet, a little charger for both your batteries because they're both rechargeable, and there's a spare battery. And then literally all you do, slide your battery straight back in the back of the light, and then pop the cover back on, and then turn it on, and we're ready to go again. And like I say, in this video I really do hope that you can see the metallic and the candy coming through and what it looks like through the light, rather than it just looking like it's blinded, because when you're actually spraying it, you know, something like a silver or anything, you can see just how even or uneven that metallic's going down. It's really amazing to see how much actually light it shows and how much coverage it shows. So I'm hoping that some of that will come through and it won't just look too bright to you guys when you're watching this back. So what we're going to do is just going to finish off this second coat, and then after this
I then put a further 2 coats down. Now I didn't do any drop coats, I kept these as full wet coats, because a bit like the wet on wet primer side of things, you want these to be as smoothly laid down as possible. So I didn't want to go put in a real sort of dry drop coat on top of it and ended up with anything that was rough or uneven or anything like that, because the key to getting this candy looking perfect is having the perfect base underneath the candy. Any scratches, any chips, any marks, anything at all really that is not faultless on this base coat will show through tenfold when this is outside in the sun, and it's just not worth it in a candy. Because the problem is, if you get the candy on and you get it lacquered and you notice a fault with that outside, you can't just add more candy on top of it. You're going to have to take that back in, you're going to have to sand it back down, you're going to have to reprime it, rebase it, recandy it, re-lacquer it, and it's such a long-winded process if something goes wrong, which is why I do this the way that I do it. People might come on and say, oh no, that's completely the wrong way of doing candy, blah 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 blah. You know what, I don't really care. This is the way that I've learned how to do it. This is the way that I found is the best and the easiest way of doing it without having any issues. At the end of the day, we're all human, we all make mistakes. If you miss one tiny sanding mark and you don't smooth, wet and dry that out enough, you could paint a whole car and then have to start the whole job again because of that sanding mark. Hence, going down the wet on wet primer route. Because if I know that my prep, i.e. I've 500 it all over, I've got no harsh scratches, and then I've wet on wet primer on top of it, that has easily filled them 500 scratches. So I have now a perfectly flat base to start laying this base coat silver down on top of. And it's a better to be safe than sorry. You know, like I say, I've done one before and I've had to redo a big job in candy just because I missed out some scratches where I'd been blocking some of the primer down, which is my own fault. So when I did the next candy job, I thought, right, you know, I made that mistake. How can I now go about doing this one with less chance of getting that same mistake? So I went to a higher prep level before I primed, and then I used a wet on wet suitable primer, left it overnight, came back in the next morning, made sure there was no dust or anything that needed nibbing out, tack ragged it off, started straight over with my coarse metallic base, which is the same as this one. It's just a straight coarse tinter from the scheme, good few coats down to make sure it's fully covered, and then started putting the candy on. It's just the way that I do it. Plenty of people that do it different, but I have found this is a safe way to do it. So this is the candy that we're going to be using. It's a nice royal blue candy. Basically, I buy this off my supplier and he pre-mixes it. So he puts the candy dye into some clear binder, so it's basically as you would buy a normal solvent base coat. And then I mix it 60-40. 60% thinners to 40% candy. One, because that means you can get a nice even wet coat. But two, you don't want to mix your candy too strong. I'm going to go ahead and apply 4 coats of this candy, and I'd rather do 4 light coats rather than 2 thick coats, because if you put that first coat on too heavy and you get any banding in this candy, you are not going to get that banding out. So we'll go through the process that I do, and basically start off with just going for real nice thin wet coats. Now obviously, as you can see, you know, the first coat, and it really does not look like you've put much on there at all. Now the reason that I'm using the Aurora light for this is quite simple. I've done this before and I've missed edges. It in places in normal natural light it looks covered in your spray booth, and when you get it outside and you turn those panels upside down and catch those different edges, it's not covered. This light is absolutely amazing for doing candy work. It shines straight through your candy just like the sun does, so you can see just how even and just how good your coverage is. And also, when you've got the candy going down, you can see if you've got any spots that may look a bit thin on your edges, because it's so easy to do with candy. You know, just try and take your time, go nice and slow, and a nice even wet coats. And you can see here I'm making sure I go around all my edges, and every single bit I'm trying my best to catch, and just keeping it good and even. Now, in between putting my last coat of silver base down, obviously I've fully washed the gun out. I'm using the PPS cups, just so I can make sure that I've got no contaminants coming out of my gun pot or anything like that, that again could affect this candy paintwork. So I'm taking every step I can to keep this as clean as possible, because at the end of it you will thank yourself that you will end up with an amazing looking candy spray job. And you might have to go those extra few steps, wetting the booth floor down, tack ragging between coats, you know, using the PPS system. I bought a couple of extra. I don't really like this system for lacquer, but it seems to work okay for Basecoat. It did a really nice job with this candy, and the silver that flowed through it really nice. I didn't feel like it's holding back like it did in the previous video where I mentioned with the lacquer, and it was not really my favourite kind of cup. And later on in this video, or in the second video should I say, I've actually got the Freckler disposable cup system on my Pro Light, and I much prefer that over this 3M one. But anyway, for now we're just going to go through, as I've said, making sure you see it and go around the backs just to make sure I've caught the back of all those edges. You know, we were going nice and even, catching the edges and the undersides, and this is where the light really comes into its own with showing just how well you're getting that coverage, because without the light on these panels they look so much darker than they actually are. So being able to see through this layer, and I think you can see it at this stage now, when I put that on you can see that looks covered. As soon as you put the light on it, I've missed a whole stripe there. And before this light I'd maybe have got my phone out, switched the torch out on my phone, or I'd have gone and got the LED torch out of the workshop, or I was even thinking about buying a 3M sun gun, but then I've got one in one hand and one in another hand. This is just effortless, it's on my gun. I don't have to go and pick something else up and start holding that in one hand while I'm using this in another. And feel wise, once you've got used to this gun, this light, sorry, I've used this a couple of times now on this spray gun, and once you get used to it, you don't even think about the fact that it's on your gun. It's nicely balanced, so it doesn't feel like it's pulling your gun, or doesn't feel alien to you once you get used to it. It takes a good few times to get used to, but you can see the difference there. And as we go further through the candy, especially towards the end of the candy in the second video, you're really going to see just how much this shows with coverage, and just what a great little tool I think it is. And I can tell you now, I got sent this one to do some trials with for you guys, because you guys had asked my opinion on it. I believe, if I'm still right saying, it's actually the first one in the country, which is a bit of an honour for me, but in no certain terms am I under any obligation to try and sell you one of these lights. I'm giving you my opinion on it and what I think of it from the work that I have done with it. So that's the first coat down. As you can see, it's still very thin and very fine and looking nice and even, which is where we want it. So for this second coat, we're going to do exactly the same as we have for the first coat. All we want to do is make sure on each and every panel and each and every part that we're painting that we're getting it as even as we can, and that we're trying to catch all those edges and all those hard to reach areas. And hopefully, if you look closely as we're going through this now, you're going to start to see, as these panels get darker, as the light catches these panels, you'll be able to see the parts that haven't got as much coverage, that need that bit extra, like down that back there, which is just trying to reach. And you'll also see just how much that silver is shining through with this light as it's passing over it, which gives you a really good indication of what these are going to look like when you get them outside in the natural light, which is where you want these to look their best. So all we're going to be doing is putting down exactly the same as before, even, wet, thin coats. We don't want to go too much too soon. Going too much too soon, running before you walk if you want, you're going to start getting heavy spots and banding, and we're going to start messing stuff up. So we're going to keep it going. I would rather spend an hour in the spray booth putting the candy on rather than 20 minutes and it get outside and it looks like crap. It's worth it. You know, the time you're putting into the prep, the time you're putting into prepping your booth, your panels, there's no point then rushing the paint on it. So as you can see here now, nice thin wet coat, you can see just how even that's starting to look now. And if you keep going through this process, you're going to end up with perfectly even panels. And obviously at the end of this first video, same as in any video, I've put all the pictures in so you guys can see what the end result look like. And also I've got some shots of the light, etc. at the end. So I know this video is a bit longer than my average video, I'll say, but I want to try and make sure I get as much of it in without having to split it up into too many parts. So what this is going to end up with basically is two 28-minute videos which will go through every aspect of putting the base coat down and putting the candy down, all the pictures of the final product at the end so you guys can see. It gives you a good look at the products we're using, the tooling that I'm using, like the light, the PPS cups, the spray gun, and also my methods of doing this. And at the end you can see what the finished product looks like. And as I've said before, I'm going to try and put as much info into both the videos as I can. And as always, if you've got any questions, just hit me up at the end in the comments box or on Instagram, anywhere like that, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can and answer all them questions for you. So you can see as that light was going over the top there, you can see there are areas, even though we're being careful, that just down those sides there, you can see it when the light catches it, that look a little bit thinner. Like the coverage isn't quite as good as the rest of the panel. And without this light, I wouldn't see that in the normal light of the booth. Candy is very difficult to get even. I'd say if you're doing a big job in candy, get yourself a scrap panel or something first, prep it up, make sure your prep's 100%, and paint it and do yourself a trial run before you go ahead and just start putting it straight on like this. And you can see there, you know, just how much that silver, that coarse silver, makes a difference. Because using a really heavy coarse silver underneath this, it gives a lot more than when you get outside. For the sun, it's got to hit those silver particles, those metallic particles, and really bounce and pop off them vibrantly in the sun. And it makes such a difference to a candy paint job. If you use a fine silver, you're going to end up with much more of a different look to it when it's in the sun. It's going to be a lot less subtle. If you use a really coarse, heavy base coat, which is why I use the coarse metallic tinter straight from a paint scheme, I just buy that pure tinter off my supplier and then mix it 50-50 with thinners, the same as I would a normal base coat mix. And then, as you can see there, it just looks so nice coming through with the light on it, and it looks identical outside in the sun. So key to the perfect candy paint job for me, prep, making sure you've got all the foundation work absolutely as perfect as you possibly can. There's no point rushing it, because if you rush it, you're going to end up redoing the job. And then making sure you got the right tooling, especially on the candy wise. You want to make sure you're using a spray gun that really has a nice, fine, even spray pattern, so that all this candy that you're putting down is going down really nice and even. You want to make sure your overlaps are nice. You want to make sure you're putting it down in really nice, thin, even, wet coats. Nothing too heavy. And every panel that you do in exactly the same way as you go around. Otherwise, when you bolt this all together at the end of the paint job and it's all back on the bike, if you go heavier on one panel to another panel, you're going to end up with all the panels being a different shade. which obviously again is no good when you come round to the end of it. So this is pretty much the end of part 1, guys. In part 2 we're going to take you through the rest of the candy work and then the lacquer stage using my GTI Pro Light. And as I've said, if you've got any questions, don't forget, comment in the box below. If you're new to the channel, welcome and thanks for watching. If you're new, click on the like button, give the video a like, get yourself subscribed. We've got on average 2 to 3 videos a week going up from now on. I'm going to keep the channel packed with as much fresh content as we can, be it accident repairs, resprays. We're going to start off this series and this playlist of custom paintwork videos, so there's always going to be plenty of new fresh stuff for you guys to watch, whether you're from an accident background, whether you're DIY, hobby, or whether maybe you're just like me and you like sitting there watching people spray, or you're one of these guys that wants to sit and listen and watch it how somebody else does it. Everyone's welcome, and this channel, guys, is purely for you. So if there's anything you want to see, do not forget to ask. So I'm going to leave you now with some pictures of the finished bike, and I'll see you again soon for part 2 on this perfect candy paintwork video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you again soon.